just going to start recording and then... Okay, so we are already in week 3 of class. This class is just flying by. I also opened up the link in Moodle so that you can access this there also. And I did that because we're going to be editing the slides when we go into our breakout room, so you can open it in your own window when you need to. Okay, so tonight for class, we're going to review developmentally appropriate practices from your readings and then also go over assessment. And I just really like this quote a lot. So, education is the most powerful weapon in which you can use to change the world. So when you feel just stressed and overwhelmed, remember that this is your goal. Okay, so I want to check in with all of you and see how you are doing. So you can either scan this this little QR box, or you can go to slido.com and then type in this code. And after you do that, just let me know how you're doing. Hey, Nancy.
Hello. I'm sorry.
That's
I
okay.
didn't know.
We just started. So I'm just checking in to see how everyone's doing. So you can either just scan the code with your phone, or you can go to slido.com and manual type in this code.
Oh, okay, perfect. Thank you.
Okay, so it looks like most of you are very exhausted and stressed and overwhelmed. And I'm so sorry to the person that is feeling sad today. Um, I think I know, because I was an elementary educator myself. I know this is really, really hard part of the school year, and now you have your own classwork on top of it. So I will do my best to get through what we need to get through quickly and then send you on your way, so you can just either get to the outside of class work or just take some time for yourself before you have to go back to work tomorrow. So just please know that I understand, and I know how busy all the things are happening at this point in the school year. I get that, and it's busy around here too. So I'm with you on how busy everything is. Also, if I can help at all, if you're feeling overwhelmed in particular about this class or about other things that have to do with this program, and you would like support from me, please hang out for a few minutes after class and I can help brainstorm some solutions. Okay, so the first thing that we're going to do is we're going to split into breakout rooms. I think we'll just go into two different rooms, and I just want you to talk about what have been your observations, thoughts, wonderings, or questions about what's going on in the classroom, and then how are you connecting that, or maybe not connecting it, to the readings and the text. So everything that you've been talking about in your discussions, and I should back up a little bit too. So common themes that I've been seeing in the written discussion posts and in the Flipgrid videos is that you're most of you are in support of play-based learning. and that you've been discussing your observations and your connections to the kindergarten classrooms, which is exactly what I wanted you to do. So that's awesome. A common theme was talking about the important things to do during whole group instruction, how important the classroom environment is and how that facilitates student learning, and then a little bit about self-regulation and how important that is for 5 and 6 year olds. And what's so amazing for me is that because I've already had all of you in 348, seeing the growth in terms of your work that you're submitting and your lesson plans is just something to be celebrated. All of you that I've been reviewing your work are really demonstrating high levels of evidence that show how you're meeting course outcomes already in this class, and we're only in week 3. And so I just wanted to say, like, I recognize the growth that's happening in this program, and I'm really proud of all of you. So I think I have this unique perspective because I get to have you in 2 of my courses and I get to see this growth happening, and it's great. So when you get into your breakout rooms, I want you to talk about just things you're seeing in the classroom and how that connects to what you've been reading, or maybe it doesn't connect at all. Or if you have any questions, if you're going through the readings or you're seeing things in the classroom and it's making you wonder things, you can record that on the slide. So we'll have 2 breakout rooms. Just briefly record your conversations on the slide so that we can exchange our thoughts with the other group. And we'll just do that for about, I think 10 minutes. Does that sound okay with everybody? Okay, and then I also am just going to, whoops. I'm just going to put this slide presentation also in the chat. And then hi Brittany, so you will be in group 2, so you can record your thoughts and connections to the textbook and just your classroom well, you're not doing any classroom observations yet. So what I want you to do for this activity is just review the slides. Just go through and see what the conversation was between the 2 different groups. And if you have any questions or wonderings that you want to add, you can add that information to slide 2. Otherwise, just review the information. Hey, welcome back. If you didn't, I hope everyone had enough time. Did everyone have enough time to at least share? It's okay if you didn't type anything out on your slide, but did everyone have enough time to like have conversation? Okay. So now if one person from each group could just talk through tell the other group and myself what your group talked about. So group 1, you're up first.
I could volunteer to talk. Okay, well, one thing we noticed was, at least for me, this was mine, is that our 4K room is very small. So there was not a lot of, like in the book, it said lots of dividers, have very clear sections and things like that. And our room is just a very small rectangle and there's no dividers at all. It's just tables and then a projector in front with like a carpet. And then lack of designated center areas. So we also discussed that could be due to COVID right now protocols. So Allison said that they used to have less centers and now they're starting to bring their centers out again. So we're not sure if that's COVID related or not. And I believe Jennifer said a lot of academic, very academic in her kindergarten classroom. And we did notice singing and rhyming and things like that.
What are some ways that you could problem solve a small classroom? And this is just for everybody, not just for group 1. Like if you get a job as a kindergarten teacher and your classroom is tiny, what are some ways to get around that tiny space and still incorporate like hands-on learning, play-based learning strategies? Any thoughts?
Maybe just switching them out more, like centers out more frequently, offering less at one time, but then rotate throughout the year.
Yeah, definitely. That's a great idea. Just keep things in storage, keep things in bins and like blocks, for example, because that's a thing that takes up a lot of space. Obviously, if you have like a small kitchen area set up, that will need to stay in place because that requires more furniture. But anything that can be put in just a clear Rubbermaid bin can be brought out during those center times and then tucked away so that your students can move safely around the room. So that's one way to problem solve. Any other ideas or solutions?
I would say to avoid clutter. I mean, when you have a lot of things in the room, it's going to make the room appear tiny, but the more that you can have it organized and less things out to make it look smaller, I mean, that could help.
Yes, definitely. That's such a good point. And just think about, I mean, even ourselves as adult learners, how easily distracted we can be when there's too much stuff or, well, for me anyways, personally, I too much stuff distracts me as an adult learner. And so think about our youngest learners and how easily distracted they are just by visual things, that it's best to keep the room. Someone just said in their Flipgrid video, your classroom should feel very home-like. And that's very true. Like, we want to create this calming atmosphere where everything has its place and students feel comfortable in the classroom, and so that you feel comfortable in your own classroom too, because you're going to be spending a lot of time in your classroom and you want to feel good and comfortable in your own classroom. So just a couple suggestions I have, and this is really across any grade level, not just for kindergarten, but I used a lot of lamp lighting in my classroom because my school was very old building with those tube fluorescent lights. And I don't know if you've noticed this for yourself, but definitely for students, it causes headaches. And it's very harsh on the eyes for learning. So just get some lamps from like Goodwill. You can find really inexpensive lamps to put in different areas of your room for lighting. And then big, just like throw rugs or carpet area rugs that you might have in your home, bring that in to your classroom. Not everything has to be bright primary colors in kindergarten. It's okay to have things that make it feel more home-like, and your students will benefit from that. Any other thoughts from this group? Okay, group 2.
I can talk about it.
Thank you.
So Tara and I are mostly in the same classroom all day. She is a one-on-one support with one of the kiddos that's actually in my class. So we both agree that we feel that our kindergarten classroom is very, very academic based, and we lack centers. So we kind of have a little bit at playtime where they kind of can pick something, but it's not the same kind of feeling. It could be COVID, but based on talking to my teacher, it sounds like it is kind of like that most of the time. So reading all that in the text kind of was like, we wish we had some more of that play-based learning in our classroom. And then Tashina is in a class where it's like very, very, very play-based. So they have lots of centers. They have 3 different specials a day, keeping the kids, having 15-minute wellness breaks 3 times a day where they get to go outside and just breathe for a few minutes and get the jitters out. Whereas I feel like we don't have a ton of that. We have a longer recess just because of COVID, but I don't feel like there was as much moving. And then Mandy is actually in a 4K classroom because 5K wasn't accepting observations, but she said based on knowing from previous years that it usually is a good mix of both academic and play-based. And then we all seem to have correlated to the text in some way, shape, or form in our classrooms, and notice areas that could be used more in the classroom. So
I think a couple of things. We're guests or coworkers in someone's classroom, right? And so I'm wondering if I'm wondering if the lack of play is a district-wide thing or just an individual school thing. That's something for all of you to think about, depending on what district you work in. And that might be just some questions you might want to ask your coworkers. Like, is this a thing particular to my own school building, or is this an across district wide initiative. I would be interested just to hear feedback from you about how that works. And then I think it's important for us and myself to remember too that when we're in someone else's classroom, it's like we're in a no judgment zone, right? We're observing, we're there to learn, and you're getting equipped with all this important, developmentally appropriate information that you can take and use in your own classroom. And I hope that by the end of this class, you feel equipped with enough knowledge and information that you'll be able to advocate for change for your own students, because all of you are really, you're the future of education. You're going to be the new agents of change that create these changes and best practices in your district where you work now, or if you get employed in a different district. So I think it's important to keep in mind all these reflections and opinions that are coming up from your perspective that you're learning about best practices. Like, just keep that in the back of your mind so that you know how to set up your own classroom. And then also keep in mind that you want to work for a school district that supports your philosophy. So if you're getting into this content now and realizing like, hey, I am really passionate about play-based learning, I know it's best practices, you want to either help create change in a district or work for a district that honors your philosophy or honors your expertise. I think it's important to keep that in mind when you do eventually become your own classroom teacher. You want to work for a district that trusts you and your expertise and where you're coming from. Any other thoughts from group 2? Okay, I do want to circle back to the play kits. So some of you came and picked up the play kits from my office. Any thoughts on the play kits, or does anyone want to volunteer to talk about what was inside?
I honestly haven't even had a chance to look at mine yet.
That's
It's just
okay.
been really busy.
Maybe after we go, you can grab yours in a few more minutes and we can unbox it together in class. And I'm actually going to grab one off my shelf quickly. So if you didn't get a chance to come to campus, it's not too late. If you want to come later this week or you want to come next week, what I did for another student is I just slipped it inside of a Target bag and put it on my office, hung it on my office doorknob, and she came over the weekend and picked it up. So if you didn't have a chance to stop by, you still can if you want. But I'll just go through what like are some things that I put in this kit. So, and when I'm showing you these materials, think about how could you use these hands-on play-based materials to support different content area or academic standards in your classroom. So I have these cards. So just think like to yourself, like, hey, what could I use that for? Play-Doh, Magna-Tiles, and then I have these alphabet cards inside a sheet protector. And then I have dry erase markers. So these can be used either with dry erase markers, with Play-Doh, or for students that are like, think 4K development level of students, they can trace the letters with the cars. And then after they complete their activity, then they can do something fun with the cars. They could make a letter. They could use the Magna-Tiles and build a garage or something with the cars. And then Model Magic, that could also be used for this to create the letters, and then you can leave it out to dry, and then they could color the letters. So they could do that for high frequency words. They could do that for letter recognition, for name recognition. And then there's just blank cardstock and Post-it notes. And Post-it notes are another great thing that you might not think apply to kindergarten students. Post-it notes can be used for anything, and it's a fun teaching supply for our youngest learners that they see you use that will help them be engaged in their learning. So does anyone else want to share what's in theirs, or?
I'll share. One thing that my kids even liked a lot when we were looking inside was I don't have my boxes downstairs, but little dogs, and there's maybe 10 different types of dogs, and we had fun trying to like identify like what type of dog, like, oh, this is a golden retriever and this is a Great Dane, and you know, because we all kind of like dogs and stuff like that. So that was really fun. I don't know how to connect that to the classroom, but it was cool.
I think it would be really fun and interesting to do, like an inquiry project about dogs. I'm sure students in your classroom are really, maybe some of them are pet owners, maybe some of them aspire to be pet owners, and you can incorporate so many different literacy standards, math standards, science standards, all surrounding just the topic of dogs. And then something else about the play kits. So this is just a tiny sample, right? Like you wouldn't be able to use one little play kit with a whole classroom of students, but it's more of like a tool to inspire you, like, hey, those little tiny dogs that were in your kit are from the dollar store. So like a whole container of those manipulatives you can find just at the dollar store. Allison, did you want to share yours?
Sure. All right, if I can open it. Okay, so I had a few of these dolls that were in there. These little guys. Oh, and there's a few more. And then I had some of the Magnetile and like Magna blocks. A baby doll. Some cardstock. Play-Doh. A couple rows of washi tape. And then Post-it notes and some little like zoo animals. I know we use Play-Doh a lot, especially in 4K. They'll have like partner bins that they do. And right now we're using it. They have like laminated alphabet sheets, and then they use the Play-Doh, they roll it out and then, make it into the letters. So I really like Play-Doh for that use.
Thank you. What can we use those little dolls for? Those little wooden dolls? Anybody, not just Allison.
I mean, I have the dolls in mine too. So, I mean, this would be for a little bit older kids, but for a writing activity, or you can use these in a house center, in a 4K or 5K classroom.
Yeah.
We could use them to like retell a story too.
Yes. Who said that?
Retell? Me.
Allison, thank you. Great point. Exactly. So after you do a read aloud with your students, take the book that you use for your read aloud and put that into the center, and then give them the dolls and let them reenact the story, or make up their own story, or create a different ending using the dolls. One thing I want to just say about the dolls is that the dolls should represent your students or expose your students to different cultures that maybe aren't in your classroom. So that's another great way to make your students feel seen, while also making your classroom more culturally diverse if it's not, because the dolls come in all different cultural backgrounds, which is a great way to support your students in that way too. And then a comment about the Magnetiles. So if you're not familiar with Magnetiles, they come in flat shapes or they come in 3D shapes. So that's a great way to connect learning of shapes and geometric thinking using those. And then we know that block play is extremely important in kindergarten. So this is a great way to keep your blocks stored away that are small in a bin, and then just bring it out when you're going to use it. Okay, great job, everybody. Okay, so in our textbook reading, we started talking about developmentally appropriate practices. And so developmentally appropriate practices are really just what we know about students and how they develop and how they learn, and then incorporating that information into our lessons to support our students. So it should be age appropriate, it can be individually appropriate, and it should be socially and culturally appropriate. So this is a way to really meet the needs of all the students in your classroom and to scaffold their learning based on their development. So some developmentally appropriate practices that you can start thinking about to put into your lesson plans is that developmentally appropriate practices aren't just focused on academic learning, it's focused on supporting the whole child. So social emotional learning is really important with developmentally appropriate practices. And then again, it individualizes the support for students, recognizes the importance of child-initiated activities. So things that we were just talking about were really teacher-directed activities. Like we're thinking about content standards that we need to meet, and we're creating activities that are hands-on learning and play focused, but they're directed by us. But we also want to create opportunities for students to initiate the learning and have that connection with learning through their own activities. It also recognizes the significance of play, which is what we've been talking about. It creates a flexible, stimulating classroom environment. So that's going back to being intentional about how we set up our spaces so that it supports the learning and engagement of the students. It uses integrated curriculum. So what that means, if you're having questions about how that looks, is not teaching content areas in isolation, but teaching content areas at the same time. So I'm not going to teach literacy and then move on to science and then move on to social studies. I'm going to embed science into literacy, or I'm going to embed social studies into math. I'm going to find ways to connect content areas instead of teaching content areas in isolation. And then it addresses students learn by doing. They don't learn by sitting and doing worksheets. I mean, they can, but that's not the best way for them to learn. And then it gives students choices. So I might put a couple different things at a center for writing, and I'm going to let the students decide which way they would like to use the materials to write with. Also, this way allows you to assess individual children and just monitor all the students while you're doing that. And then this also helps form partnerships with families. So some effective teaching strategies that are connected with developmentally appropriate practices are all of these things that we've kind of slowly been talking about and that I've heard common themes come up in your discussion posts. So sensory engagement. So how can we engage the students' different senses in their learning to support them? Environmental cues. So again, using the classroom to support students' learning. Scaffolding, which is greatly supported through center rotations. That's the best way that we can scaffold students' learning, because we can meet with different groups of students that are at different developmental levels so that we can support all the students in our class. And then guided practice also goes along with the center time approach. And then modeling. We know that there's so much modeling that needs to happen with our youngest learners because they're learning about things they've never experienced before. So we need to model those effective strategies. And then someone was just talking about this in their post about using effective praise. So really telling the students, being specific about what they're doing well will help them grow and learn. And then someone else was also talking about using open-ended questioning and how that's so important to elicit higher order thinking skills during the lesson and units. So I know that you've learned about the intelligences, the multiple Howard Gardner's and multiple intelligences before. It's come up in your other courses. And so I just wanted to briefly just remind you about how important it is to make sure that students are exposed to all the intelligences. So while you might be a learner that really needs music embedded in the lesson because you learn best through music, it's also good to be exposed to all the different intelligences so that you can just get exposure to those and see what that feels like so that you're not just stuck in this one mode of intelligence. any questions about developmentally appropriate practices or what instructional strategies can support developmentally appropriate practices? Okay, I'm going to keep moving then. So in a few weeks, we are going to have some expert kindergarten teachers be guest speakers for our class. So what I want you to do is think about some questions that you would ask an expert kindergarten teacher. So this is someone that you don't work with, someone that isn't in your district, but someone completely different that is really an exemplar in the field of education. So I thought we could just come up with some quick questions together as a whole group of what you would want to ask an expert kindergarten teacher. And then we can add to this list, or if you think of something after class and you want to add it to this document yourself, you can go ahead and do that. Anything come to mind that you would want to ask an expert kindergarten teacher?
How to incorporate more play-based learning when you have, like, our school uses Lucy Calkins for reading, and then they have Bridges math. Like, how do you extend that to be a little bit more play-based instead of so strict?
So how do you incorporate play-based learning into a set curriculum?
Yeah, I guess.
I would like to ask about scheduling and how their day is laid out and what that looks like.
Thank you for reminding me to talk about the scheduling. I do want to talk about that also. Let's keep these questions in the back of our mind as we go through the next half of class. And then before the class is over, I will hop back over to this document and we can add more questions to it. So as we're talking, we're going to talk about assessment now. So as we're talking about assessment, if you think of something else, just jot it down and then we'll come back over to this document. Okay, so we're going to talk about assessment. What's the purpose of it? How do we assess our youngest learners? So assessment informs instruction. It guides children's progress. It helps you identify students that might need specialized help or additional health services. It allows you to report the student's progress to the families. And then it also helps you identify strengths or limitations of your lessons, your units, or even your instruction. So assessing student learning allows you to take a look at yourself also. So let's say you are assessing students at the end of a unit, and across the board, all the students are struggling on a certain concept. That's a good time to ask yourself, like, hey, something is not right here. If the majority of the students are struggling with this specific skill or content area, that lets you know that you need to readjust and make some changes in your own lesson plans or unit plans. In your textbook, on page 213, the page might differ depending on which edition of the book you have. There are options for assessment and evaluation. So authentic assessment is a variety of data collected over time. So think beyond standardized assessment. Authentic assessment assesses the different developmental domains. It takes place in the natural setting. So that means if your students are primarily doing hands-on center rotations, that's how you're going to assess your students. It's functional. It's based on discovering the child's best performance, and it's useful for planning instruction. So authentic assessment is based on your observations that you're doing. It's not on testing or on-demand tasks because our youngest learners are not reliable test takers. So if we're giving our students, and this happened in my own former teaching practice because I had a scripted curriculum that I needed to follow per my district's plans of how they thought kindergartners should be taught. Giving a multiple choice assessment to kindergarten students doesn't assess their knowledge, but rather it assesses their fine motor skills, their ability to pay attention. And yeah, so when you're thinking about authentic assessment, you want to think about what are you trying to learn from the students, and what do you want to find out about their growth and progress. And then this is a quote from the book. The most successful teachers pick and choose different documentation strategies and formats and use them throughout the day. So what does that mean? Just want to make sure I don't get ahead of myself. Okay, so we're going to get to that. Like, what does that mean, different documentation types? But here are some questions that I think are really helpful. And I got these questions from this book called Saving Play. This is addressing standards through creative learning.
Give me. Give it to me. Sorry.
That's okay. So these are some questions that you can ask before you start. You can ask before you start making observations and doing your authentic assessment. So I think something that happens in lesson planning, in the assessment section of our lesson planning, is that we say we're going to make observations, which is totally appropriate and something I want you to be doing, but you need to decide, how are you going to record those observations? Will you keep a class list and make anecdotal notes? Will you take a photograph of students? Will you be recording on a device the conversations that they're having? It's really important to plan how you're going to keep track of that data, because when you go to finish doing narrative feedback for your students, or you're having parent-teacher conferences, you need something to document the progress, to show to parents, but also just for your own self to remember, because you're going to have a big classroom full of students and you're not going to remember exactly what each student did just from memory. I mean, none of us can do that. So we need to have some kind of documentation when we're doing our assessments. So this slide will be, this slideshow is available on our Moodle page, so you can come back to this particular slide and think about these questions when you're going into the assessment part of your lesson. So assessment during play, what does that documentation look like? And I think these are some really helpful suggestions. So you can record students' conversations with each other as they are doing free play. And of course, you want to pre-teach to your students and you want them to be comfortable and familiar with you recording. So you'll need to do some like pre-work prior to implementing these strategies in your classroom so that you get that really authentic conversation. You can take dictations about students' drawings, paintings, or constructions. And I would suggest just using a Post-it note. Don't actually write on their artwork because that would be offensive. So like use some kind of like sticky note or something that you could just paper clip onto their work so that they can tell you about what they did so that you can gauge their growth and understanding. Video students engaged in pretend play or in construction with blocks or manipulatives. So this is particularly important because we can't keep constructions of block play or manipulative play during math. We can't save that over time. Sure, we might be able to tuck it away in a corner for a day or two, but if our classroom space is really small, we're not able to do that. So we want to document that experience some way. And then I think this is a really great idea, and I would have loved to try this strategy myself. So after students engage in play experiences, pair students that weren't in the same play experience. So take someone that was in dramatic play and pair them with someone that was in the block area and have them describe what they did, what they liked, or what they could do differently. And this is something else that you'll need to do a lot of pre-teaching and modeling. So you'll have to get a partner and model how this conversation will go. But I think it'd be really interesting to hear what the students say to each other. And it would be really interesting to see if this helped a student that is always drawn to the sensory area, if they might be drawn to another area of the classroom after talking to a peer and finding out what the peer did. So it might help expose your students to different areas of free play. Any thoughts about assessment?
I guess I have a question. So the 4K and 5K and I guess first grade teachers just finished up doing PALS testing. So where does that fall into this assessment? I mean, it doesn't really fall under the authentic category.
Yeah, I do have experience using the PALS assessment, and I think it falls under the evaluation category. And the PALS assessment gives tons of good information about how your students are doing. And depending on what your district requires of like a form of standardized data collection assessment, PALS is a great tool to use. The only like negative drawback of using PALS is that it's so time consuming and it takes the teacher out of the classroom because you want to do those assessments yourself because your students are most comfortable with you and you know when you could maybe push a little or pull back or when your students are just like they're done, they've been sitting there for too long. And so it takes you out of the classroom, which is why I think the paraprofessional teacher relationship is so important because then when the teacher is executing those assessments, the paraprofessional is basically a team teacher and then can just have the classroom learning continue on. But in my experience, I would have like a sub or a building sub or someone come in the classroom that didn't have a deep understanding of my classroom practices. And then it was like a whole block of the day was just kind of a wash for the students that were in the classroom. And so that's unfortunate. So if my school district would have us completing the PALS assessments 3 times, that is a lot of time where the teacher is out of the classroom. So that's my only thing about PALS. Well, it gives valid information. The valid information only comes, in my opinion, when the classroom teacher is doing the assessment, unless there's another adult in the room that the students are really comfortable with, like another adult that's consistent that can help give that assessment. Does that help? I'm not, I don't, how do I want to say this? Standardized assessments don't give us accurate information, and our accurate information comes from these authentic assessment practices. However, we're employed for a school district and we have to, do what our school district initiatives are. And I think my advice to you is just continue to advocate for best practices for your students. And if your administrators aren't informed in early childhood best practices, once you have yourself established at your building, I don't think there's anything wrong with sharing some scholarly, research-based information to advocate for best practices for your students. Okay, so another thing that you can do to for assessment is to collect work samples. So I just wanted to show you some work samples that I have collected from students, and I'm just going to quickly pull it up. Okay, so that was not the right link, so I'm just going to delete that from our slides and share this with you. So this is an example of a rhyme recognition template that you could use while you're walking around and monitoring students while they're engaging in center time activities or playing a game. Obviously, you can change these words in the categories, but this is just a form of data collection that was created that allows you to assess the students during multiple different dates throughout the school year. Rhyming is a big skill that we need students to learn because it supports reading and fluency and reading comprehension. This is another just tracking tool that I used. So each student would I would have one of these for each student. I would carry it around on my clipboard as students were participating in center activities or small group work or working with me during guided reading. I could assess their understanding of letters, and then I would have the same one for lowercase letters and letter sounds. This is good to do right at the beginning of the year too, so that when students come into your classroom, you can get a snapshot of where their understanding is. And then I would collect lots of different writing work examples. So this one's from February throughout the school year. So they would fill in the blank on their own and do a picture to match. So collecting writing samples tells you a lot about student learning and growth. And then it's really a nice thing to show parents where their student was at in August or September when they started and where they're at all the way at the end of the school year. So this was another teacher created assessment. So just having the students identify letters, draw a picture that begins with that initial sound, and then if they're able to label their drawing. This is a great tool for fine motor skills too. Like, how are your students doing with fine motor skills? Okay, any questions or thoughts about assessment? Okay, so I know a lot of you have already submitted like draft lesson plans to me, which is great. Your first lesson plan is due today. You don't have to have taught the lesson yet, but you should teach it soon, okay? So your first lesson plan template should be turned into LiveText today. So if you haven't done that, make sure you do that as soon as you can, and then set up a plan just to teach that. So that's a lesson that I won't observe or watch a recording of. I do encourage you to record the lesson just in case anything happens with your other two, but I don't need to do an observation or evaluation on your first lesson. So what questions do you have about lesson planning?
I just had a question. When I turned mine in, I had like a bunch of standards just to cover like everything that we were hitting on in the lesson. But you had left a comment, that you should have as many objectives as standards. So we're not including like anything that could fit into it, just like what our main focus is.
Yeah, so if you're including standards that might happen throughout the entire week, not just in that one snapshot of the lesson, you can put a little comment or star and say, these are all the standards that are going to be covered in literacy for this whole unit or for this whole week. And then just maybe highlight or put in bold the standards that you're focusing on for that particular lesson.
Okay. That makes more sense and it's less work.
Yes.
So like I feel like for my read aloud lesson, it hits a couple different standards, but I don't have enough objective to necessarily match that because they all kind of go together. So for each standard, I have to have an objective.
No, if you have an objective that covers multiple standards, that's completely fine.
Oh, okay, perfect. And then also for the assessment part, like I'm doing a read aloud and a craft to incorporate my read aloud lesson. So I already did the other two, which I had already submitted, but for assessment for that, I mean, I don't really necessarily need to do too much, but be like monitoring and supporting where needed.
Yeah, so maybe you can put like some plans for future assessment. So if your lesson really doesn't require any type of assessment, you can put some plans like during guided reading, I'm going to follow up with the students on one-to-one correspondence, and I will do some observations during guided reading and record each student's skill level or something like that.
So it doesn't have to be in these specific lessons, but something that goes with the band of the lesson.
Yeah, if your lesson is too short where there isn't really going to be a specific assessment for that day in that particular 15-minute window when you're teaching, then you can think more broadly about how you can incorporate assessment. And it's hypothetical. Like if you're not going to continue on teaching throughout the unit, that's fine, but it just gets you in the groove of planning.
Above how, okay. I just was like, because obviously in kindergarten, the lessons are so short. So it's like, you're not always doing an assessment every lesson. So I put stuff in, but it's not necessarily stuff that needed to be put in, but just to have something there. Okay.
Yeah, good idea.
Could you go over the lived experiences? Just because I was getting when I was looking it up, I was getting mixed reviews on what it means when lesson planning.
So for the learner section, you want someone to pick up your lesson plan and get a snapshot of who your students are. So what do they like to do? What are their, lives like in terms of classroom experiences, so that if I was going to jump over and take over Allison's lesson, I would know exactly who her students are. Okay, so I'm going to talk about a couple things before we log off, and then let me know if anyone has any other questions for our expert chat document. So this is the outside of work between now and next week. So discussion posts on chapters 7 and 8 on our Moodle page. So this is the written discussion post. And then the Flipgrid video is choose your own article. So there's a bunch of different articles on our Moodle page. your choice. Choose from whatever category. And then I assigned you a blog buddy or a YouTube buddy. So whoever your buddy is, go and check out their blog or go and watch their YouTube video and then send them an email or send them an email because you can't comment really on the YouTube videos, I don't think. And then for your fourth blog or YouTube video, what assessment practices have you observed or discussed with your kindergarten mentor teacher? So what kinds of assessment are you seeing in the classroom? And then I'm just going to switch over to our Moodle page so I can show you a couple things. Okay, so I'm just gonna. So here is the Google document right here. So you can click on it and see who your blog buddy is and make sure that you take a look at their work. And then also at the bottom of that document is where I am keeping track for you of the posts. So if you're wondering like, hey, what posts have we done so far? These are the posts you should have done so far. So the first one was initial thoughts on play-based learning. The second one was just what's happening in the classroom. What were those observations that you're seeing? The third one was about the module that you completed last week. And then the fourth one is assigned. And then after you teach, do a reflective blog or video about how your lesson went. So everyone will have 3 of those by the end of the class.
I know when we were in our breakout rooms, a few of us were saying we were confused by that because we didn't see the first 2 blog posts on Moodle.
So the first one I talked about in class, and then I think I might have talked about the second one in one of the videos I talked about. If you don't have it done yet, don't worry about it. This is just a reflective tool. It's really for a way for you to think about your teaching practices. So you can just, work on this when you have a chance. But again, this is really for you to think about and reflect on what you're seeing in the classroom, how your lesson plans are going. So it's under week 1, so that's where you can access that document. Okay, so we're in week 3. So there are 3 different categories of articles you can choose from. So whatever you want to learn more about, building and maintaining student relationships, assessment practices, or this website's called Learning for Justice, you can pick any one of those articles to do your Flipgrid response on. It's your choice. Okay, and then next week is an asynchronous learning week. So we won't meet via Zoom. You'll work at your own pace. And these are the things that I want you to work on. So a discussion post that next time on Flipgrid. Watch the videos linked below and just be ready to chat about it when we meet in week 5. And then every partners are assigned an article to read. And then we'll do a group share of that article. And then it's time to start doing lesson plan number 2 and scheduling an observation with me. So if you can have me join I think everyone is in person now, right? I don't think anyone's doing virtual learning.
Well, we're in person, but because we have students that are virtual.